Hello. What I want us to think about today is the character of St. Peter in the Gospels. He's the only character that seems to have a personality in terms of the disciples. He's the only one that seems to have a personality, a character, somebody you can sort of perhaps describe. How would you describe him? Because you've all read the Gospels many times, and his conversations, the incidents, with Jesus, his saying, "I'll never, deny you, Lord," and then he does deny him, and how his great enthusiasm, you're the Messiah. And then we see more of this, how he's supposed to have had a sort of an encounter, spiritual encounter with God on the water somewhere, fishing or something like that. So now, in the gospel stories, Jesus makes him what's called the head of the church. Makes Peter, the disciple, the head of the church. And the gates of hell will not prevail against you. That's just, think of that scripture. I'll be honest, and I don't mean to badmouth Peter, because we don't want to speak ill of the dead and things. But, if I was looking for somebody to be ahead of anything, I wouldn't pick Peter. I wouldn't pick Peter for anything. I wouldn't have him head of a tea party, to be honest. What comes across about Peter is you somehow get a sense of very nice, very affable, very enthusiastic, very sincere man, but a man who doesn't really know himself, and a man who clearly denied Jesus because he got frightened. That's why he denied Jesus. He got frightened. And, we can't condemn the poor man for being frightened, because who doesn't get frightened at some point in their life? Terrified. He was absolutely terrified. That's why I think he denied Jesus. He was absolutely, what's called, shit scared. He was absolutely terrified, right? And one might say, well, afterwards he learnt his lesson. Yes, that's a little moral of the story, He realises, he shouldn't have denied you. We all know that. But that reveals a lot about his character, doesn't it? The type of person he was. Think about leadership. Think about the qualities you'd be looking for a leader of anything. Never mind the church, never mind somebody in charge of a cake shop, somebody of a manager of anything, the local office, somebody of a manager of a political campaign, anybody with a degree of responsibility. What qualities would you be looking for? What qualities would you be looking for? People in charge, people who take authority, generally are quite bold people, and they're not really afraid. They're not really afraid of anything. You have to have a lot of confidence, lots of maturity as well. Even young people, if they're leading something, sort of students' union, you have to have quite a degree of maturity to be in the role of leadership. So we're looking for maturity. We're looking for somebody sort of a stable disposition, not too high and not too low. A stable character. When I look at St. Peter as a character in a novel, I don't see somebody that I would appoint to any leadership position. St. Peter is the sort of person that you would like as an enthusiastic, follower. The one that can that's really enthusiastic and will encourage everybody else to get involved. You won't want to give him a position, in politics of responsibility. No, 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 you wouldn't give it to Peter. No. What he would be good at would be encouraging the troops and being an assistant, perhaps with the teenagers' political group. In other words, if you're going to give him any degree of responsibility, it would be very, very junior, and it would be as an assistant. I don't see anything in the character of St. Peter for him to be given a role of such responsibility as being a head of a church, a head of a massive organisation, doing St. Pope Francis's job, doing his job. And you're thinking, why would, it doesn't really add up. It doesn't really add up that Jesus would give somebody like this such a degree of responsibility when he doesn't seem to have the maturity. You can imagine St. Paul being given that responsibility. That's no problem. Yeah. St. Paul, head of the church, we don't have a problem there. We could see Jesus allocating the Apostle Paul. Because in a sense it would make more sense, because this is a man with learning. He has got learning, right? You might not agree with him in everything, but he knows his religion. He's an Orthodox Jew, he knows his religion. But he's obviously well read and things like that. But you've got Peter, who's a fisherman, and no disrespect to fishermen, but he won't be sort of academic. He won't be very deep thinking. He won't, he'd be very a nice, hands-on, down-to-earth fellow, right? But, when it comes to responsibility and powerful organisations of being in charge and taking decisions, and you want somebody very, very, very smart, don't you? You'd be looking for somebody a bit like St. Paul, wouldn't you? You were looking for that kind of person. You would. I think the last person anybody would choose would be St. Peter as a character. If you're just thinking of him, what your impressions of him, of the incidents in the Gospels, you've got to be really, really honest with yourself. Would you appoint him to a position of responsibility in your company? Because if you're having doubts about that, well, I'm not really sure. I don't think so. Well, can you imagine being supposed to be the head of the church? It doesn't quite add up. You've got that juxtaposition of you've got a very weak character, and then of course Jesus gives him the name Peter the Rock. It's like he's solid when it's quite obvious he's not solid. He's the most unsolid person you could think of. He doesn't fit the name Rock. He doesn't fit the name Rock. He doesn't fit the name Rock. That doesn't, you see, that's a bit puzzling, because your name says a lot about you. My Hebrew name is Devorah, and that means the bee stings. Right. Right. I do have my words, I don't mean to be cutting, but my words can be sharp-edged when I write, when I speak. Can have an edge to it. There are also such things as loner bees, the independent bees that can go off and they're quite happy doing their own thing. Another thing about the name Deborah is Deborah the prophet. So, really, I think the name Deborah that the rabbi chose to give me is actually quite appropriate concerning my personality and the type of person I am. I think it probably does fit. I think it's a good fit, actually. But Jesus gives him the name, the Rock. Peter doesn't, and you're thinking, well, he is not. Does a rock deny Jesus? I know he's probably learnt from his experience. I don't mean I know he's probably learnt from experience, but that is part of his character. That the fact of panicking and losing it, that will be part of his character. And it's a life's work working on your character. If you are naturally lose it and you can't take the pressure and you just everything, how is he going, how inappropriate is it for him to be a head of an organisation, a head of anything, and all the responsibility that goes with it? Even at the very beginning of the infant church, you've got him supposedly in charge. That's what it's about. He's the one that's supposed to be taking the ultimate decisions. When you're having discussions about what to do, this, that, the other, the leader is the one, first of all, who manages the discussions and then they kind of bring it to a close, and then they have to make the ultimate decision, and then they have to carry that decision, because often when you make a decision, other people disagree with you, and then he's got to hold that decision because he's a leader. That's another thing about leadership. There's nothing in the character of Peter that suggests to me a leader, not even a leader in the making. Because when you're looking at a leader in the making, you're looking for certain characteristics. I mean, if you ask any teacher at school, even at junior school, they'll be noticing things about character traits about children, and they'll say, I bet that one will be a leader. Or it's sort of kind of obvious in the way they interact with people and things. I should think he was a very vocal character and had a lot to say for himself, but it's one thing being that and another being designated a leader. I think if you asked, it would be very interesting to find if you got writers, people who write books, like Dan Brown, for instance, or anybody who writes books, and give them the Gospels and say, look at the character of Jesus. Would look at the character of, Peter, would you say that he is a leadership? Does he have the potential for leadership as a character when you're looking at his conversations and the incidents in the Gospels? Does he look to you like this is a potential leader? I would be very surprised if they say yes. If you contrast Peter with King David, now David was a shepherd, and David was the one that was willing to come against Goliath with his slings. You remember the story of the sling? He was totally fearless and totally confident and very plucky. That was part of his character. But there's nothing that is in the character of David when he was a shepherd boy that would indicate not being in a leadership position. You see, because what you're doing, you're looking for signs of leadership. And I can't actually see it in Peter. I can see it in King David, in David, because of his pluckiness and his bravery, fearlessness and total confidence in God. He had total confidence in God. He knew when he went against Goliath in the name of the God of Israel that he would win because he had confidence in God. So he had great faith in God. This doesn't necessarily come across with St. Peter, great faith in God. He recognizes that Jesus is the Messiah, and as typical with Christianity, because this is where Christianity is, Jesus says this has been revealed to you, by God. This is not just you working it out, putting two and two together and making four. No, This is God revealing it to you, Peter. This is very typical Christianity, because Christianity doesn't like people using the brain. Christianity doesn't like people using the brain. Christianity doesn't like St. Peter working out, using his noggin, and using his reasoning, and using his intelligence, and using his knowledge of the scriptures to come to a decision about anything. No, it has to be revealed, because that, to the Christian mindset, seems more spiritual. Because that's what Christianity loves. It loves, ooh, it's been revealed. They don't like the hard graft of sitting with scripture. We've got to find out, is this the Messiah? From the Hebrew Bible, from the scriptures that God has given us. No, they like the airy-fairiness. And that's, I think, why you get Jesus, the character, saying this, it's been revealed. Like, Christians love it. It's been revealed. I have a vision. I had a dream. I had this, that. Christians love this. And Christianity loves this. It loves it. It loves the mystique of it. Because it feels so spiritual. What Christianity doesn't like is the intellect. Using the intellect to work things out. To look at the scriptures, to study, to think, to pray and reflect and come to a decision. No. For Christians, that's not spiritual. No, they don't like it. They have an abhorrence to that. Christianity and loves, it's been revealed just to me and nobody else. They love it. People love it. It feels more spiritual. And I think this is where we're moving into magic. Because this is what magic's all about. And this is what magic plays on. And this is what magicians play on. Because they know human nature. The illusion. The person is walking on water. But the magician will say, I suspect the magician will say, no. That person is not walking on water. That's an illusion. I don't know how, and they could possibly explain. But magicians are very good at illusion, making you think you see something, making you think you hear something when it's not there. They seem to be masters at almost fooling you. So that's one aspect of St. Peter we're going to consider. The second thing is that I've just moved into it, is Peter, this account of him walking on the water. Right. It's interesting how in the New Testament, the Gospels, these kinds of things, this only happened to just a few people. So there was only, how many observers were there? Seeing Peter walking with disciples, seeing them apparently walking on the water, and seeing Jesus apparently walking on the water. Again, that could be an illusion, but I don't know how to do it. This is magic. You'd have to check with the magician. But again, I'm thinking, why wasn't this recorded? Why didn't somebody record this down not long after it happened? You see, there are now outside sources for these stories. And I would expect an outside source for that. Very, very quickly. Because if something like that happened, surely word would spread very quickly and somebody would write it down. In those times. There is a magic feel of this Jesus walking on water. And it's just for a select few of people who are supposed to have seen it. and I can't help but be a bit skeptical of it, because it just feels very magical to me. And I can't relate that to how God works in the Hebrew Scriptures. Right. To me, this seems to be a small limitation of the magnificent, literally, acts of God in the Hebrew Bible, in Torah, that you read. God parting the Red Sea, providing water from the rock, manna from heaven, feeding the Israelites in the desert for 40 years. All the plagues in Egypt, at the Passover, the dead of all the firstborn of Egypt at Passover, the flooding of the earth at the time of Noah, and then the receding of the waters. I mean, all these are magnificent miracles on an absolutely huge, massive, gigantic scale. And in comparison, these little stories are just so meagre and so trivial, and it almost feels like a magical, like magic's trying to sort of get in there and come up with something, and it can't compare to the greatness of God demonstrated in the Hebrew Bible. This is such a small, minute imitation of trying to imitate God that it just seems to be more an illusion and magic. It's like what a magician would try and do, to try and imitate the God of the universe, and they can just come up with trying to give the illusion of somebody walking on water. Now the main thrust of the video is I want us to seriously consider, this is very important, on this story we have of Peter being out on the river or the sea, whatever he's fishing, and right, he has a little spiritual experience. He has a conversation with God, and he sees some, I don't know, he sees some lobsters or something, whatever, and God says, eat, and he says, no, Lord, I would never eat anything unclean, right? And then God is apparently supposed to reply, don't call anything I have made unclean. Well, what's all this about? Well, my gut reaction is this, is that at the time of the early church, you had non-Jewish people embracing this Jesus, right? And there's a whole discussion in the church about, do we need to keep kosher anymore? Do we need to follow the Jewish laws anymore? You've got the non-Jew believing in Jesus, and they're saying, I don't want to keep all these Jewish laws. I don't want to keep kosher. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. To me, this little story is a wonderful way for the church to give validity to non-Jewish people not feeling any obligation to take on the Jewish laws. In other words, they believe in Jesus, yes, but they're not going to become Jews, and there's no need for them to become Jews, because if God has said it's all right, you can have bacon butters, you can have lobster, then of course you don't need to observe the Jewish law. And it's also what's coming across in these words is God is saying, don't keep my laws that I have given you for eternity to observe. Don't observe them anymore. This is what the nuts and bolts of this story is about. It's about the church really saying, through this story, right, very serious implications, that Judaism as a religion is no longer valid. Keeping the laws of God, the 5 books of Moses, has no validity. It means nothing to God. There is no need to do it. There's no point doing it. Keeping kosher is not required. Probably keeping the Sabbath maybe not. Keeping anything is not required. Nothing in the Torah, that is the laws, regulations and everything given by God to the Jewish people to observe for eternity, is no longer, by God's authorization, no longer needed to be done anymore. In other words, that those laws and regulations are now obsolete. There's no need for them. This is really what this story is about. And I think a lot of non-Jewish Christians, majority, won't know this. They won't know this. They won't realise this. They won't realise the huge, huge significance of this story being put into the canon of Scripture, right, of the New Testament, because it was placed there by the church, and it's there for a reason. And the reason I would argue it's there is that they don't want any Jewish person to be observing the laws of God that were given to the Jewish people to observe. All the laws of diet, all the other laws of do's and don'ts and regulations, and the sacrificial system, when there was a temple, everything. Really, the church is saying here, God doesn't think He's made it all obsolete. This is what on the surface seems an innocuous little story. Oh, you can have lobsters now, Peter. It's all right. You can eat what you want. Also, what comes across in this, which makes me very suspicious, is the attitude that they're giving to this God, who is apparently saying this. God, remember, the quote is, God is saying, don't say anything I have made is unclean. So in other words, God's getting annoyed with Peter and correcting him. He's correcting him, Peter, and saying, don't you say that anything I have made is unclean. Everything I made is okay to eat. Right? Again, this doesn't have a hint. I'm very suspicious about this. To me, this doesn't ring true. I think that, to me, this sounds like the church putting words literally into the mouth of God. They want God to say this, and they're getting God to quote this. They're using God to quote something that they want to happen, right? Remember, God has given these commandments to the Jewish people to observe for all eternity. Right. This is for the Jewish people. And now suddenly, God is supposed to be saying to St. Peter, don't say to me, anything that I have made is unclean. No, that to me doesn't ring true. To me, that totally contradicts what God has said in the Torah. It doesn't ring true. How can it be that the God of Israel, who has commanded his people to observe all these laws, whether you like them or not, whether you think they're silly or not, is not the issue. This is the laws he's given to the children of Israel for all eternity. Observe my laws. And nobody knows, ask any rabbi, nobody knows why Jewish people aren't supposed to eat prawns or why they aren't supposed to eat bacon. Nobody knows. There is no reason. It's just God says don't do it, and that's it. There is no reason, right? But suddenly you have in the New Testament, God is saying, don't call anything I have made unclean. So he's actually telling Peter off. Don't you say what I've made is unclean. God's getting shirty with Peter. Peter's saying, I'm not going to eat that. It's not, it's not kosher. And God is telling Peter, don't you start saying what I've made isn't kosher. It's perfectly all right for you to eat. and you jolly well ought to eat it. No, this doesn't ring true. I think this is a lie. I think this is a blatant lie. And I think this is a lie of the church. A lie of the church to get the Jewish people to disobey the commandments of God and observe not eating bacon and not eating lobster and all the rest of it. Right. Because God has commanded the Jewish people to observe these commandments, right? And it seems to me the church is here coming in now, and it's got the Jesus now, it wants to keep the Jesus. It wants pagans now believing in Jesus. Pagans don't want to be getting circumcised. Pagans don't want to be converting to Judaism. Other people don't want to be converting to Judaism. They don't want to be observing all the Jewish laws. They want it nice. They want it nice and easy. They just want praise Jesus, praise Jesus. They don't want to be observing the commandments of God given to the Jewish people. That would be too much like hard work. They wouldn't want that. They wouldn't want that. Oh no, I don't want that. I want to do exactly what I want. You see. And also the church does have contempt for Judaism. It has total and utter contempt for the Jewish law, for the law of God. So the law of God that's been given to the Jewish people, the church has total and utter, complete and utter 110% contempt for. This is what's so shocking about Christianity, is that it has so much contempt for the very laws of God given to the Jewish people for eternity. And here it is, I argue, coming in with a story. It's what seems an innocuous story, but it has serious implications of basically saying to every non-Jew, you don't have to bother observing what the Jewish people observe. You can have Jesus, right? You can have all of this. And these Jewish people shouldn't be observing this anymore anyway. It's not needed. It's not necessary. Because at the time, there was a bit of conflict within the church. The Jewish people, perhaps Jewish believers in Jesus, wanting to keep kosher and all the rest of it. Thinking they should keep kosher, thinking they should keep the Jewish laws and believe in Jesus. Then you've got the non-Jews saying, well, I don't want to observe Jewish laws. And then you've got all difference of opinions, right, as you do in life. Because this is a major change now. And because people don't know what they're supposed to be doing. They're believing in Jesus. They think he's the Messiah. Or they think, yeah, right. They're thinking he's that they've killed him. They believe that they're responsible. Well, again, this is from the church as well, but that's another thing. I lost my thread there. This is what happens. Sorry, I'm not well. And so you've got all these disagreements within the right at the beginning. Should we still be keeping kosher? Should we still keep this? No. And then the non-Jews, we want to. Why should we have to do this? And we don't want to do this. And so the church settles it with a little story. And so that would in effect mean that any Jewish person who believed in Jesus would be told, oh, you don't need to observe kashrus anymore. You don't need to observe the Jewish law anymore. And I think this has got very serious implications. Because I think what we're seeing here is the church is inciting Jewish people, really, to disobey Torah and not obey it. I think this is what this story is actually at root all about. I think it's actually a very dangerous story because it's giving validity to any Jewish person who believes in Jesus that if they used to keep kosher and observe, to say you don't need to do it anymore. It's totally unnecessary. Now, the Christianity doesn't understand Judaism. They think that Jewish people observe the Jewish law in order to try and get into heaven. And that if they, break a Sabbath law or something, they're going to go to hell. They are putting their own belief system onto Judaism. But that's not how it is, you see. You see, Christians believe if they don't believe in Jesus, you don't believe in Jesus, you've got to go to hell. Right? So the Christian is thinking if the Jewish people don't break any of the laws at any time in their life, the Jewish laws, that they will go to hell. But that's not how it works within Judaism. So they are, what's the word? I think you know what I'm getting at here, don't you? They're putting their own framework, religious framework, onto Judaism, but that's not the framework of Judaism. Within Judaism, there's always atonement and there's always forgiveness, right? And people don't go to hell for, breaking, one of the regulations or something, something. That's not Judaism. It doesn't. It's totally different. It's totally different. Within Judaism, obviously with the temple and everything, God provided atonement. Right. God provides atonement for transgressions. Right. Now the temple we don't have a temple now, but God forgives. You ask any evangelical Christian, you ask any Catholic, just say it casually. I've done something wrong and I feel awful. If I ask God to forgive me, will he forgive me? And I really mean it. Do you think he'll forgive me? Every single Christian and Catholic will say, yes. That will be their gut response, yes. Yes. If you're sincere and you repent, God will forgive you. But then, of course, the evangelical Christian will suddenly remember Jesus. But then you do need to believe in Jesus, They'll suddenly remember. But, and so, I just don't believe that this conversation took place. Remember, there's no witnesses. This is what's so extraordinary about this. There were no witnesses to this conversation, right? This is extraordinary. I mean, this is an incident that changes, in a sense, the whole framework of Judaism. This incident is basically saying to every Jewish person on the planet, every rabbi, there is no need for you to observe my laws anymore. This is what this story is saying. Because if God is actually saying to Peter, you can eat lobsters and you can eat, certain sea fish, you can eat pigs. If God is saying that, then that means anything and everything is fair game in the Jewish law. In other words, it basically means that God is saying you don't even need to obey any of my laws. Do you see where I'm coming from with this? This is why it's so dangerous. And of course, non-Jewish people, I don't think perhaps Christians realise the implication and the great seriousness of this story. And there's no witness to this. This is just Peter on his own. I mean, I wouldn't trust Peter, but I wouldn't be trusting, believing Peter over anything, to be honest. He's not a character that comes across in the Gospels as a reliable. Would you want him? You know, I don't know. Would you want him if you're on jury service? Would you want Paul there? Would you want Peter there? He doesn't come across to me. You know, this is one man claiming to have this conversation with God. And on the basis of that one conversation with God, one man on his own, a vision, whatever, all the rabbis, all the Jewish people on the planet are now supposed to stop obeying God's laws that he gave at Mount Sinai and observe none of them. I mean, this is what this story is implying. It is implying that. It's very clear in black and white, because if God is saying, you know, don't you say what's unclean, you can eat it, then he's basically saying you can break the whole lot. That's what it is. And this is what the church wanted. This is what the church wanted. And the church has always had contempt for Judaism. And for me, the way I see it, in a sense, I think it's absolutely wonderful that the Jewish people have resisted conversion to Christianity and held firm to Torah, because they're holding firm to the commandments of God. They're not renouncing it all and saying, oh, we don't need that anymore. We just need Jesus. That's what the church wants. The church wants all Jews to renounce, have nothing to do with Torah, to say it's totally unnecessary, it's obsolete, it's old-fashioned, there's no need for it, and now you've got Jesus. And this is supposed to be a new agreement. A new covenant, because that's what a covenant is. A covenant is a legal binding agreement. And the Torah given to the Jewish people is forever and ever, which is everlasting. How long is forever? It's forever. Does forever have a sell-by date? No. This milk will last forever. If you get it, it says it lasts forever. You won't be saying, where's the sell-by date? It won't have one, because it lasts forever. That's what forever is. It doesn't have a sell-by date. It doesn't have a use-by date. It goes on and on and on. But what I see is a very clever, canny little story here that seems so innocuous, but the implications are so great, because what it's saying, it's throwing away Judaism. It's saying Judaism, the religion of Judaism, is absolutely, totally obsolete. Obsolete and unnecessary. The covenant, the Mosaic covenant, is no longer, has no use of this world. We don't need it. Throw it all away. Let's, and this is what I find so shocking, and it won't be shocking to a non-Jewish Christian. Because the non-Jewish Christian, most Christians have a very negative view of the Torah given to the Jewish people. Because most Christians, in my long experience, because I was a Jewish believer in Jesus for 42 years, is they are reluctant. I mean, if Christians had to obey Torah like the Jewish people would, most people would not become Christians. I can tell you that. Most people who become Christians would not want to take on board Torah, right? They wouldn't want to do it. They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. I know from my experience their attitude towards obeying God. there's a deep reluctance to obey God. People, Christians, evangelical Christians, they're very passionate. I want to obey God. I want to glorify God. I want to say everything's for Him. But when it comes down to it, what I found an awful lot is a reluctance to do the hard things for God. They like it easy. This is Christianity. They do like things easy. And so they have a contempt for Judaism because they see the ritual, the observance and everything, and they say, oh, that's like too much hard work. I don't want that. What evangelical Christian would be observing the religious life of an Orthodox Jew? They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. If Jesus said, I need you to do that, I'm not very keen on that. I don't think I fancy that. Because they're all full of talk and emotion and glory. No, I want to glorify you, Jesus. I want to do your ways. You hear all that. But this is just hot air. Most of these people, when it comes down to it, when it comes to the hard things, are not prepared to suffer the hard things. For God's sake, they're not prepared to do the hard things for God. They like it easy. And that's why the church demolished and threw away the validity of Judaism through this little story. It's basically saying any Jew who believes in Jesus, you don't need to bother with all of that. There's no need, it's all obsolete, not necessary. You've got Jesus now. Do what you like, eat what you like, do what you want. Great. And that's what Christians love, in my experience. Just doing their own thing. Just following the Spirit as the Spirit leads them. And it's all very much feely. I feel this and I feel this and I feel this and I'm led here. It's all. And really, for people who don't want to live disciplined lives or to have any structure or what you might call regulations or certain things you need to do, or you mustn't do this but you must do that, and in my experience with Christians, they wouldn't want that. And that's why they're so despising of Judaism. They have nothing but so much contempt for the Orthodox Judaism. They have contempt for it. They like the festivals. They love the festivals. They like the Passover, and they like the matzah, and they like they like the nice bits. But what they don't like is the hard bits. They don't like anything that smacks of perhaps doing things when you perhaps don't always feel like doing them, or not doing things really. It's they do like they're very contemptuous also, little often of ritual as well, religious ritual, and of course the rabbis are having to put the nuts and bolts to the commandments of God, like keeping the Sabbath. So God says don't rest on the Sabbath, so everybody says, well, what does it mean don't rest? So the rabbis, their job is to guide the community as to what is work and what isn't work. Because somebody's got to make this decision. Somebody has to decide whether working all day on the Sabbath on the internet is work or not. Somebody's got to make that decision, because God has said don't work on the Sabbath. So somebody's got to make the decision. The community's got to make the decision. Is working online work on the Sabbath? A lot of people might say, I like working online. It's not work to me. I love it. But you see, it's supposed to be a Sabbath, a day of rest, isn't it? The Sabbath. So this is where the rabbis over the centuries have had to outwork the commandments of God to help the Jewish community keep up to date and apply their religion in an up-to-date way, right? And taking into account new technology. And it is actually up to date. It does apply things. It's aware of things changing all the time and new technology. But because of that, it's even more important that you get wise decisions about what is permissible to do and what is not permissible to do on the Sabbath. Because as you know, as I know, people are workaholics. I mean, workaholics will make any excuse to work when they shouldn't be working. And as I think a lot of people have commented about even Sunday, which used to be a day of rest now, you've got all the shops open, all the supermarkets, all the chain stores, everything is, I mean, from when I was a child in the 1960s, Sunday was really, really quiet. You couldn't hear a pin drop. No traffic, all the shops were closed, everything was quiet and silent. It was very, very quiet, but not nowadays. It's totally different. It's almost like Sunday is almost like another working day. And so when you have that happening in society, then it's the responsibility of the rabbis to try and guide the community, the Jewish community, you know, what's permissible and what isn't. And it's all for good, and it's all to try and get people to observe the commandments of God, of observing the Sabbath. But Christianity doesn't understand this. But to get back to this conversation, we have to remember there were no witnesses. This is just Peter, who I just wouldn't know what to make. If he came back and said that to you, knowing Peter as a character in the Gospels, would you believe him, or would you think he was exaggerating? Or would you think he was daydreaming? Would you think he's lost the plot? Would you think he was a bit high? He's like, oh, Peter, he's a bit crazy, he's got these mad ideas. Well, we would say, Jewish people say he's Meshuggah, Peter. He's nice, but he's a bit Meshuggah, he's a nice lad, but he's a bit sometimes. That's what Jewish people would say about Peter. He wouldn't be given any responsibility in the Jewish community. No. He wouldn't. Peter wouldn't. Because he's a bit of a hothead, isn't he? He's a bit... You don't want somebody like that in a leadership role. You want somebody, And I just can't think of a worse person to be head of head of anything but St. Paul, than St. Peter. But I don't mean to be mean about him. But we all know nice people, and not everybody's made for leadership. I'm not made for leadership. I'm very good at being an assistant leader. I've had jobs where I'm an assistant. I'm very good at being an assistant, but I'm not suitable for leadership. I haven't got the qualities. It's something innate in you. Some people just have it, and some people just don't. And I've come up to nearly an hour talking about this. I hope this has been helpful and gives you food for thought about everything. And I thank you for taking so much time to listen to me.